Hello lovers of cardboard and plastic, and welcome to another How to Play. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to play Resident Evil 2, the board game. So let's get right into it with setup. The first thing you're going to do is look in the scenario book for a scenario. You can either play in campaign mode where you start with the first scenario listed in the rulebook and continue through each scenario sequentially. Or you can play each scenario as a one-off. The scenario rulebook is divided into two sections. One section which will look like this, which tells you how to lay out the board itself, and a second page which lists special rules, deck setups, and encounter dice tables. We'll go over what all of that means here in a moment. The first big thing you will be doing is setting up the board. You follow the map pretty closely. You do not have to pick any tile based on its artwork, just based on its shape. Then you'll populate the board. You may have certain tokens on the board, such as doors. I have both the 2D and the 3D versions of these tokens. I'll mostly be showing the 3D tokens when we get to the actual demonstration, but just in this segment, I will show a little bit of the 2D ones, just so that you know what they look like. They are a little hard to see on camera, though. You may be populating the board with corpses, typewriters, various enemies, storage boxes, and possibly a boss monster. You might be also placing on the map various wall tokens. There's a small and a large wall. Very hard to see on camera because of how black they are. There are special key cards that show a lock symbol on them and what item is necessary to open that door. So you can place the card with the door right under it. You might also have various item tokens marked with A or B scattered across the map. Once setup for the board has been completed, you'll notice on the map itself there are two spaces for characters marked with a 1 and a 2. If you are playing with 2 or more characters, at least one character must be at each one of those starting locations. Of course, if you are playing in solo mode, then you will place your character in the space designated with a 1. So maybe in this case, Leon would start there. Next up, you'll find a player board, which you'll place right here. You'll take a health token, put it at the fine level. For whichever character you have, you find their character card, and you can place it on the board. And then if you're playing campaign mode, you'll probably already have a bunch of items, but if you're playing just a standard scenario, you'll have an equipment list. For each scenario, there will be a listed number of item cards that you will need. They'll look like this on one side, and on the other side, they'll either say A or B. You'll shuffle these two and set these into two separate piles within reach of all players. You also need to set up a tension deck. The tension deck basically sets how long the game will go. You'll use typically all 30 green all clear cards, a few red cards, and a few yellow cards. The scenario book lists the titles of the cards, but also you can look at the bottom of each card and see what scenario they are used in. And that does it for setup. A few things of note before we get into the actual gameplay. All tiles are made up of various squares, which will help you determine range, line of sight, and also the limits for each square. There are 3 types of models: small base models, large base models, and huge base models. For small base models, you can have up to 4 models in a single square. Once the limit has been reached, though, no model can be pushed into or move into that square. For large base models, you can either have 2 large bases in a single square, or 2 large bases and 2 small bases. A huge model, on the other hand, takes up the entire square. Line of sight is pretty simple. It's basically as long as you can draw a single uninterrupted line from where you are firing to the space in which you are firing into, you have line of sight. So in this case, because Leon's line of sight would cross over this wall, he does not have line of sight to this model. But if the zombie were moved down here, you could draw an interrupted line straight to the model, and thus he would have line of sight. Now let's get into the actual action phase. In the action phase, the character whose turn it is has 4 action points to spend to do various actions. The first action a character can do is a move. A move action is quite simple. You basically move from one square to another, and that's considered 1 action point. As long as that character doesn't cross over a wall during the move, they are able to perform that move. So Leon could, in this case, go 1, 2, 3, 4 for completely uninterrupted movement. He could also move diagonal here because he doesn't cross over a wall for 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, because he moved into an enemy space, he would have to do something else, but we'll go over that a little bit later. Now, if this enemy weren't here, Leon could not go a diagonal because he would be crossing this wall. Instead, because of this wall, he has to go around. The second action a character can perform is open or close a door. Doors will typically be at the edge of tiles like this one, and Leon could use one action point to open the door. Or if he was running into this room for safe haven, he could close the door using one of those action points. If Leon's on the same space as an item token, Leon could perform a search action. To perform that action, you would remove the item token and then draw from the appropriate item deck, either A or B. If you look at your character card, you can see the item limit for each character. It's typically around 8 items, unless they have a backpack item, which will expand that inventory. If Leon is in the same square or an adjacent square to another player, you can do a trade action, in which you can exchange any number of items between your inventory. Lastly, characters can use items in their inventory. Now Leon's starting to run a little bit out of handgun bullets, so he's going to discard the handgun bullet card to refill his handgun bullet ammo. And lastly, for one action point, you can do an attack. Now you choose a weapon in your inventory. In this case, we're going to choose the handgun. If you look at the card, the first is the range, which just requires line of sight. Leon has clear line of sight to this enemy. The next one is how many dice you'll be rolling. In this case, only one of the blue. Next up is what symbols mean. So you'll have, for a single bullet wound shot, you'll do a push. If you manage to get the double bullet wound, you'll actually do 1 wound of damage. The handgun actually does have a special ability. Because it fires so quickly, you can shoot 1, 2, or 3 bullets per one action. Leon decides to shoot 3 at once. He'll lower his handgun bullet ammo appropriately, and then roll the dice. Now, unfortunately, he only got a single bullet wound, so he only does a push action to the enemy, which means you can push that enemy into a various space. If Leon instead had rolled all 3 dodge symbols and not a single attack symbol, the attack would be unsuccessful and the enemy would get to move forward. Next up is the reaction phase. This is where the enemies get a turn to react and actually fight back. You'll have to look at the enemy card. It'll show how much they move and whether they can attack or not. They get to, if they're in range, they get to attack. If they're not in range, they perform their move. You might be wondering what this box in the right-hand corner of the enemy card is for. That's a special attack for enemies and is usually only activated by certain tension cards. Note that when enemies activate, only the enemies on the current tile of the active character and any connecting tiles will activate. Tiles are connected if they have an open door between them. In this case, this zombie is not in range and would thus perform the 1 move action to be in the same space as Leon. If the enemy started in the same space as Leon, it would get to attack in that case. Leon does get a dodge roll, and if you look at his character card, he gets to roll 2 dice. He would roll them and get 1 and hopefully get one of these 3 symbols. The single arrow allows you to dodge 1 standard-based enemy. If you see this, you get to dodge up to 2. And with this one, 3. So if a licker had also been in the same space as Leon, he would have to roll at least the 3 for his dodge to be successful. With the single base though, if he rolls this or any of the other 2 symbols, he would be successful. With 2 enemies in the base, he needs to roll at least 1 of those symbols. Now, if Leon is unsuccessful in dodging, you lower his health by 1. Whichever enemy performed the attack would then get pushed out of the space. In this case, we'll say the dog. And the game would continue. Even though multiple enemies could be in a square and do an attack, they all contribute just towards 1 attack. A thing to note about enemies is some will do out-of-sequence reactions. Unless stated otherwise, if Leon does a move, they typically won't react. Lickers are the exception to that. But, like I said before, if you make an attack, if that attack is successful, that enemy will have the effects contributed to it. But any other enemy will get to do their move reaction. In this case, that would put the zombie dog right on top of Leon if his attack against the zombie was successful. If it was unsuccessful, then both enemies would be moving into his space. If you make an attack with enemies in your square, if the attack is successful, then no reactions will be performed. But if it's unsuccessful, the enemy gets an attack that cannot be evaded. And lastly, if you want to perform any other action besides an attack, if the evade roll is successful, you can successfully perform that action. If it is not only do you suffer the effects of the attack and must push the enemy out of the square, but you cannot perform that action. In some cases, you might have enemies who have a choice of which character they can go after. In this case, this zombie is equidistant to both Claire and Leon. Since in our example we've been mostly using Leon, we'll say Leon is still the active character. Thus, the zombie AI will prefer the active character over the inactive one. Lastly is the tension phase, in which you will draw one or more cards, depending on any status effects, from the tension deck and resolve them. If you draw a green all clear card, you're perfectly fine and don't have to do anything else. If you draw a red card, you will have to read and resolve any effects that card does. Same thing with a yellow, which may affect enemy movement or possibly the next round. Now, a couple additional game rules to actually know. Mini scenarios will include tiles that have an encounter level to them. In my example here, we're going to say that this tile here is a yellow encounter. Now, Leon, for the very first time, is moving into that tile. You'll roll the standard d6 that comes with it, and then resolve whatever number you get on the table provided for that scenario. This may cause more enemies to spawn, corpses to appear, or if you're lucky enough, there'll be nothing there. Some scenario will include stairwells. To move will just be the same as if it's a move action, but you're moving from one tile to another. You should also know about item boxes. If you are adjacent or in the same square as an item box, you may spend an action to place any number of items inside of the item box. And of course, if another character comes along, they may interact with that item box to take any number of cards out of it. The last major rule to know in this game is the tension deck. In most scenarios, unless said otherwise, once the tension deck runs out, the scenario is over and all players lose. The way to keep the game going, though, is through the use of ink ribbons. 2D token and 3D token shown here. Ink ribbons are shared across all characters in the game. If one character is near a typewriter, they may spend an action to reset the tension deck. All cards in the discard pile will be shuffled right back into the tension deck, and you'll continue playing as normal. If you end an action in the same square as a corpse, you must roll the d6 included in the game. If you roll the umbrella symbol, which is also a 1, then that corpse will become a zombie. Throughout the game, you will also be encountering bosses. In this case, Birkin Stage 3. Bosses are unique and not controlled by the normal set of actions. When a character enters a tile with the boss, they are stuck there until the boss is defeated or all players are defeated. You'll still do the same sort of back and forth reaction, but instead of resolving the normal set of actions for enemies, each boss comes with their own AI reaction deck, and you resolve them top down. After that, you'll still draw a tension card, and then continue playing. Bosses cannot be pushed. They are not affected by any sort of tension deck rules. One final rule to know about characters: if a character's health ever goes past the danger level, that character will become incapacitated. Enemies will ignore that character. The game will not be immediately over, though, unless another character cannot resuscitate them. In order to resuscitate them, you need to be in the same square or adjacent and have a first aid spray. If no character has a first aid spray or there is no remaining first aid sprays in the item decks, the game is over. Thank you for watching this How to Play. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to check out other videos on my channel and remember to like and subscribe. Thank you and see you next game night.